the big one, we all know what it is. Let's start on beautiful Rocky Top, Tennessee. Georgia at Tennessee. Georgia, a 10-point favorite in the DraftKings Sportsbook. Over-under set at 58.5 in this game. Worth noting, when Tennessee did lose to Missouri last week, it clinched the SEC East title for Georgia. So Georgia is going to Atlanta. They are playing Alabama. So we got that to look forward to. But from the Georgia perspective, we got this big game here and now. And obviously, if you're Georgia, you want to keep winning. You win out, you're probably the number one seed in the college football playoff. You go into the SEC championship game undefeated. There's obviously a chance that if you lose to Alabama, not saying you want to lose, but if you lose to Alabama, depending on how other stuff goes, maybe you get in as an at-large. So you want to keep winning if you're Georgia, but this is certainly going to be a tough test. Now, in terms of Georgia, let me say this. We've talked about this a little bit. I want to create or coin a new term. The Georgia roller coaster really is a wild ride, okay? And so the Georgia roller coaster isn't what you think it is. It's not like the team is up and down, but it feels like, and we've talked about this, the perception of the program is up and down. They play a bad half. They're not great. They're not elite. They don't look up to your standard. And everybody says, I don't really know about Georgia. South Carolina game earlier this year, Auburn, they did not look great. And then every time you doubt them, what ends up happening? They come out and destroy the next team that they play. So think about earlier this year, right? They win against Auburn, but it's not always pretty. People start doubting them. How good are they? Then they just come out and take it out on Kentucky. Coming out of the bye, Florida, they just beat South Carolina. Maybe Florida can keep it close. No. Georgia's going to embarrass you. And then, of course, after the Missouri game, they beat Missouri, but they're not dominant by any stretch. There was Ole Miss last week, and they punished Ole Miss. 51-17 was the final score. It was not competitive. I thought it was maybe the best offensive game maybe I've ever seen from Georgia, certainly in this era, and certainly relative to the competition. You're playing a top 10 team last week, and you look at what they did. 611 yards of total offense. Carson Beck, I think, is quietly just lying in the weeds of the Heisman Trophy conversation. I don't think he's there yet, but I do think that ultimately, he wins a couple more games. He wins an SEC championship game. He throws for 400 yards on Bama, and I'm not saying he's going to. And Michael Penix struggles. Jaden Daniels, who knows what happens with him over the last couple games. Carson Beck is having a really, really good season, and it is worth acknowledging. But what was especially important for that Ole Miss game, Georgia's run game was dominant. 300-plus yards of rushing. Well, I take that back. It was actually 300 exactly. 8.6 yards per carry. And Georgia, the very rare team that actually gets healthier over the course of the season. So that's the scary part, right? They're peaking. They're playing their best football. They just beat a top 10 team by 1 million points. And they obviously brought back Brock Bowers last week as well, which is a big deal. So Georgia's 10-0. Again, they've clinched the SEC East. And then on the other side, there's Tennessee. While you could argue that Georgia is coming off the best game that they have played all year, could also argue Tennessee's probably coming off the worst, right? They go to Missouri. Missouri's a really good team. Don't want to discredit Missouri. But at the same time, it just fell apart for Tennessee. Now, on the one hand, look, final score was 22-7, or the final score was 36-7, but it was 22-7 in the fourth quarter. And there was it wasn't quite as bad as the final score indicated, but it wasn't good either. 83 total rushing yards for Tennessee. Worst rushing game of the season as best I can tell. Went back and looked at the numbers. Best I could find, it was the worst rushing game of the season. And then beyond that, just everything else was ugly. 9 penalties, 95 yards. That's not good. Turnovers. That's not good. What was it? A pick six touchdown for Missouri. That's not good. And so these feel like two ships passing in the night, right? Tennessee coming off its worst game of the season. Georgia coming off its best. Now, in terms of this game, I think it's interesting. I think you can look at this kind of one of two ways, okay? And let me explain why. If you just look at this game from the kind of matchup perspective, how these teams kind of match up, I do actually think it favors Georgia quite a bit, okay? Because Tennessee, while they struggled last week against Missouri, they have been, and we've talked about this, they've been a line of scrimmage team this year. For the most part, they have run the ball very effectively. The pass game's kind of been hit or miss with Joe Milton. And for the most part, they have had a very good run defense and been able to get after the quarterback. So you look at those as strengths for Tennessee. You look at the fact that they quietly have a top 25 rush defense in college football, and you sit there and say, well, you're playing against Georgia. That's great news. Well, here's the thing. Georgia's passing attack is actually the strength of this offense this year. We just talked about Carson Beck a minute ago. And so Tennessee's pass defense is a little bit of a weakness for them. Now, they have guys that can get to the quarterback. That is worth noting. And I think that's a really important thing to think about because of the fact that obviously that's going to impact some of this game. James Pierce, 8 sacks this year. Tyler Barron has 6 sacks, whatever. So I just go on and on down the list, and Tennessee does get to the quarterback, but when they don't, they do give up a lot of pass yards. That's not good news going up against a very good Georgia pass offense. And then it's also worth noting that Tennessee, again, as weird as it sounds, they want to run the football. Top-ranked rush offense in the SEC, actually second to LSU, which is tops in every category in the SEC. But then Georgia's rush defense is elite, top 20 nationally, second in the SEC to only Texas A&M. So you look at the matchups. Second best run offense versus second best run defense probably does not favor Tennessee. And then, of course, again, the Georgia pass offense versus a not good Tennessee secondary, that's not ideal. I guess where I get tripped up, though, and I guess where I think Tennessee is going to keep it close. This is really the toughest test of Georgia's season in terms of a road venue. And it sounds crazy because we're in mid-November. We are talking about, what is this? The second to last weekend of the regular season. You know, this is only Georgia's 3rd road game because remember, they've played 3 out of conference games so far. Those were all at home. They were supposed to play Oklahoma. Everybody knows that series got canceled when Oklahoma went to the SEC. Also, the Florida game on a neutral field was a Georgia home game by technicality. So this is just Georgia's 3rd true road game of the year. And again, because there was a neutral site game involved. And here's the crazy part. You know what the other 2 road games were? At Auburn, which was a 7-point Georgia victory, and at Vanderbilt, which isn't even really a road game when you really think about it. First of all, it was mostly Georgia fans. They're basically playing in a high school stadium with all the construction. And so I bring it up because this is just Georgia's 3rd road game of the season. And they do close next week at Georgia Tech. So it'll be a 4th road game, but I just bring it up to say, I do think Tennessee is going to keep this close, and my official best bet is Tennessee plus the 10 points. Not because I think Georgia is going to lose. Listen, I'm done picking against Georgia, but it's a couple things. One, it's the ebbs and flows of the season, the Georgia roller coaster. Every time you think they're peaking, they come back down to earth a little bit. It's like, they read the headlines. They do. Maybe they don't, but they do. But every time you think they're peaking, they come back down to earth, and every time you doubt them, they put their best foot forward. So I just look at this game, and I think, look, I haven't seen anybody pick Tennessee. Tennessee's coming off their worst performance of the year. Georgia's coming off its best performance of the year. So naturally, everybody loves Georgia to win this game and to win it and dominate and cover. I'm going to do the opposite. I will take Georgia to win because Georgia hasn't lost a regular season game, and I don't even know how long. Years, literal years. But they haven't lost a regular season game in forever. And so there's that. But I do think Tennessee keeps it close because I just look at this Tennessee road environment, CBS game, 3:30 Eastern time. This is going to be a big one. I do like Georgia to win, but my official best bet is Tennessee plus the points. I think it's something in the neighborhood of Georgia 28, Tennessee 24. Go ahead, give me a Georgia victory, a Tennessee cover. Georgia runs the SEC slate undefeated as they get set for Georgia Tech next week.